Before you hear another word, understand this. What you're about to hear is the reason most people stay exactly where they are for years, while watching others quietly pass them by. This isn't motivation you've heard before. This isn't advice designed to make you feel good for 5 minutes and forget it tomorrow. This is uncomfortable, and if you truly listen, it will change how you move for the rest of your life. Right now, somewhere in your mind, there's a version of you that knows exactly what needs to change. You already know what you should stop doing. You already know what you've been avoiding. The problem isn't lack of information. The problem is that you've been leaking your power without realizing it. Every time you talk instead of act, every time you announce instead of build, every time you look for validation instead of results. Most people think failure is loud. It's not. Failure is quiet. It happens slowly through small decisions no one notices. And success works the same way. Quiet, invisible, unimpressive until it's undeniable. If you've ever felt frustrated watching people doubt you, underestimate you, or treat your goals like a phase, this video is for you. If you've ever started strong and faded out without understanding why, stay here. And if you're serious about making the next chapter of your life different, not louder, not flashier, but real, then don't click away. Because once you understand this, you won't need to announce your future anymore. You'll arrive in it. Stay with me. Most people misunderstand silence. They think silence means hesitation, uncertainty, or fear. They assume that if you're not talking about your plans, you must not have any. But psychologically, silence is often the clearest signal of seriousness. When someone is truly committed to a direction, they stop explaining it. They stop advertising it. They start conserving energy. Because energy, unlike words, is finite. Here's what happens the moment you tell someone your plan. Your brain registers social recognition. Even a simple nod, that's great, or mild encouragement releases dopamine. And dopamine is the same chemical released when progress is made. The problem is, no progress has actually occurred. You've just tricked your nervous system into feeling accomplished without earning it. Over time, this rewires your motivation. You become more attached to talking about change than creating it. This is why so many people feel busy, but remain stuck. Their effort is being spent on narration instead of execution. Silence interrupts that cycle. Silence keeps the reward system honest. When no one knows what you're building, the only satisfaction available comes from the work itself. That's when discipline begins to replace motivation. And discipline is what survives long after excitement fades. Silence also protects clarity. Early plans are fragile, not because they're weak ideas, but because they're unfinished. An unfinished idea exposed to too many opinions becomes distorted. People don't respond to your vision as you see it. They respond through the lens of their own limitations, fears, and past failures. Even well-meaning advice can shrink a plan before it has the strength to stand on its own. When you move quietly, your thinking remains sharp. You don't have to defend your choices. You don't have to justify your pace. You don't have to edit your ambition to make others comfortable. You stay aligned with the original reason you started. That alignment is rare, and it's powerful. There's also a deeper philosophical element here. Silence forces responsibility inward. When no one else knows what you're working on, there is no external pressure to perform for appearances. There is only the quiet confrontation with yourself. Did you do what you said you would do? Did you show up when no one was watching? That internal accountability is far more demanding than public accountability, and it's far more effective. People often say they want accountability, but what they really want is reassurance. Silence removes reassurance. It replaces it with truth. You either did the work or you didn't. There's no story to hide behind, no progress to exaggerate, just evidence. And here's the part that most people don't realize. Silence changes how others perceive you, even before results appear. When you stop talking, people stop predicting you. They stop categorizing you. They stop feeling entitled to an opinion about your direction. This creates psychological space. And in that space, you gain freedom. Freedom to pivot. Freedom to slow down. Freedom to go all in without announcing it. Silence is also an act of respect toward your future self. You're acknowledging that the version of you who hasn't arrived yet deserves protection. Not every thought needs a witness. Not every plan needs a timeline. Some things need time to mature in private. Think about the most competent people you've encountered. They're rarely loud about what they're doing next. They don't rely on anticipation. They rely on preparation. Their confidence doesn't come from being seen, it comes from being ready. That kind of confidence is built quietly, habit by habit, decision by decision, and when setbacks happen, silence becomes even more valuable. Failure is heavier when it has an audience. It invites shame, explanation, and unnecessary pressure to recover quickly instead of correctly. When your work is private, your setbacks are instructional, not humiliating. You can study them honestly. Adjust without panic, continue without drama. Silence doesn't mean isolation. It means selectivity. It means choosing carefully who has access to unfinished versions of you. It means understanding that not everyone deserves front row seats to your process. Some people earn access after consistency is proven, not before. In a world addicted to visibility, choosing silence is a form of intelligence. It's resisting the urge to turn life into content. It's understanding that depth requires privacy, that real growth is often invisible while it's happening. So if you feel the urge to announce what you're about to do, pause. Ask yourself whether you're seeking accountability or applause. Ask whether speaking will strengthen your commitment or dilute it. Most of the time, silence will give you the answer you don't want, but need, because the strongest moves are rarely announced. They're revealed. When you tell people your goals too early, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You enter into, a psychological contract you never consciously agreed to. The moment someone hears your plan, you feel a quiet obligation to live up to their expectations. Not your own standards, not your internal values, but their reactions. Is what creates psychological debt. You haven't borrowed money, you've borrowed approval, and approval always comes with interest. That interest is paid in the form of pressure. Pressure to explain yourself, pressure to update people, pressure to show progress even when real progress doesn't move in straight lines. Over time, this pressure changes how you behave. Instead of asking, "What does this goal require from me?" you start asking, "How will this look to others?" That shift seems small, but it's enough to derail long-term growth. Psychologically, humans are wired to maintain social harmony. When people know what you're trying to do, your nervous system stays alert to their reactions. A raised eyebrow, a casual joke, a polite silence, each one subtly influences your decisions. You might delay action to avoid embarrassment. You might rush results to avoid disappointment. You might scale back ambition to avoid criticism. None of this happens because you're weak. It happens because you're human. This is why external accountability often fails over time. It doesn't strengthen discipline, it replaces it. You stop being guided by internal standards and start being managed by external expectations. And the moment those expectations disappear, so does the effort. True consistency doesn't come from being watched. It comes from having a clear personal code and honoring it when no one is checking. There's also a cognitive cost to explaining you, ourself. Every time you talk about your plans, you mentally rehearse a future that hasn't happened. You spend time defending an outcome instead of building the systems that would produce it. The mind can confuse rehearsal with preparation, but they are not the same. One is imagination, the other is execution. When goals are private, your relationship with them is direct. There's no audience in between. You don't need to perform optimism. You don't need to justify slow progress. You don't need to make your journey sound impressive. You can be honest about uncertainty, honest about fear, honest about how long it actually takes to change. That honesty is where growth accelerates. Because once you stop managing perception, you can start managing behavior. You focus on inputs, not impressions. You measure success by effort and consistency, not by how convincing your story sounds. Another overlooked effect of psychological debt is rigidity. When you tell people what you're going to do, you lock yourself into an identity prematurely. You become the person who's doing this, and if the plan needs to change, your ego resists. Not because the change is wrong, but because you don't want to contradict the version of yourself others have already accepted. This is how people stay stuck in outdated goals, not because they're committed, but because they're embarrassed to evolve. Privacy gives you flexibility. It allows you to adjust without explanation, to abandon what no longer serves you without apology, to refine your direction as you learn more. Growth requires revision. Public goals often punish it. There's a philosophical distinction worth noticing here. Standards are internal. Expectations are external. Standards ask, did I live up to what I believe is right? Expectations ask, did I live up to what others predicted? One builds character. The other builds anxiety. When you rely on standards, your behavior becomes stable. When you rely on expectations, your behavior becomes reactive. You're constantly adjusting to signals around you. That's not leadership, that's compliance. Most people don't realize how much of their ambition is shaped by the desire to be seen trying. But being seen trying is not the same as doing the work, and in many cases it actually reduces the likelihood that the work gets done well. Think about how differently you operate when no one knows what you're working on. You're calmer, more patient, less defensive. You're willing to take the unglamorous steps because no one is watching anyway. That's where mastery is built, in the absence of applause. Psychological debt also makes failure heavier than it needs to be. When others are invested in your goal, setbacks feel public even if they're private. You start to avoid honest reflection because you're busy protecting your image. But failure is not a verdict, it's data. And data is only useful when it's examined without shame. Keeping your goals private allows failure to do its job. It teaches instead of humiliates. It informs instead of discourages. You stay in the process longer because you're not rushing to prove anything. This doesn't mean you never share your plans. It means you share them selectively and intentionally, with people who understand process, not just outcomes, with people who respect silence and don't demand updates, with people who hold you to standards, not timelines, and even then you let your actions do most of the talking. Because the most dangerous thing is not failing publicly. It's succeeding privately, but quitting early because the pressure became louder than the purpose. So if you feel overwhelmed, ask yourself whether the weight you're carrying is the work itself or the expectations attached to it. Remove the expectations and the work often becomes lighter, clearer, and more sustainable. You don't need to borrow belief from others. You need to build evidence for yourself. At the end of everything we've talked about, it comes down to one unavoidable truth. Results end every conversation. They don't argue, they don't negotiate, they don't explain themselves, they simply arrive. And when they do, all the noise that once surrounded your plans becomes irrelevant. Most people believe they need permission to succeed, permission from family, from society, from timing, from confidence, but success has never waited for approval. It moves forward regardless of who understands it. This is why announcements are seductive but dangerous. They make you feel seen before you've earned visibility. They create the illusion that progress is happening when all that's really happening is attention. Results operate on a different level. Psychologically, humans are wired to respect outcomes more than intentions. You can debate ideas, you can dismiss plans, you can question motivation, but when faced with undeniable evidence, the mind recalibrates. Opinions adjust after the fact. This is why trying to convince people beforehand is wasted energy. Convincing is a weak substitute for execution. There's also a personal transformation that happens when you stop announcing and start building. Your identity shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone who's going to do something and start seeing yourself as someone who does. That distinction matters. The former lives in the future. The latter lives in discipline. When you focus on results, your behavior changes automatically. You begin prioritizing what actually moves the needle. You lose interest in activities that look productive but don't compound. You become less emotional about setbacks because your self-worth is no longer tied to how others perceive your progress. You're anchored in the work, This is where patience is born. When no one is watching, you stop rushing. You stop forcing milestones just to have something to show. You allow growth to happen at its natural pace. And paradoxically, this often accelerates real progress because you're no longer distracted by the need to impress. There's a philosophical element here that's often overlooked. Outcomes are the only honest feedback loop. Words can lie. Intentions can be rationalized. Stories can be rewritten. But results reflect reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. They expose gaps between effort and expectation. And that exposure, while uncomfortable, is how refinement happens. People who announce too much often become attached to the idea of success rather than the process that produces it. When reality doesn't match the announcement, they experience cognitive dissonance. Instead of adjusting behavior, they defend the narrative. They explain why it didn't work. They blame timing, resources, or other people. This protects the ego but delays growth. Results remove the need for defense. They don't require justification. They stand alone. And because of that, they build a quiet confidence that doesn't depend on or motivation. Confidence becomes a byproduct of consistency, not a prerequisite for action. Another important shift happens in how others relate to you. When you stop talking and start producing, people change their tone. They stop offering advice. They stop questioning your choices. They stop feeling entitled to your time and explanations. Respect follows evidence, not promises. This isn't about proving people wrong. It's about freeing yourself from their expectations entirely. When results speak, you no longer need to. Your energy is preserved. Your focus stays intact. You're not pulled into debates about what might happen. You're grounded in what is happening. And this applies beyond external perception. Internally, results build trust with yourself. Each completed action reinforces the belief that you follow through, that self-trust is rare. And once it's established, it becomes one of the strongest psychological advantages you can have. You stop needing external motivation because you've seen what you're capable of when you commit quietly. It's also worth noting that results don't have to be dramatic to be powerful. Small, consistent outcomes compound. They create momentum. They shape identity. The problem is they're not glamorous. They don't photograph well. They don't generate immediate praise, which is why most people abandon them. But those who don't end up with something far more valuable than attention. They end up with leverage. Leverage is the ability to move through the world without constantly explaining yourself. It's the freedom to choose, to say no, to operate on your own terms. And leverage is built slowly through results that stack quietly over time. So, if you're tempted to announce your next move, ask yourself a simple question. Would I still do this if no one ever knew about it? If the answer is no, then the goal is about validation, not growth. If the answer is yes, then you're ready to begin, because the world doesn't reward intention. It responds to evidence,